You can't pay your employees or your rent. How is your landlord going to help you? We're on location 3 blocks from the White House with Michael Goldman, the president of MGA Incorporated, and welcome to the Language of Business.
Thanks for having me, Greg.
You are a tenant-oriented real estate brokerage. What are you telling your tenants right now to do with their landlords?
Yeah, I think it's an unbelievably tough time because for the first time ever, the tenants can't get access to their space, right? They are not using the space. So I think the first thing is, one, let's review the lease. Let's get counsel on board. And then let's also just have a conversation with the landlords. We need to pay rent. Most of these leases are not taking away the burden of paying rent from the tenant's perspective. And so we need to, one, pay rent, and then two, initiate and engage in a conversation with the landlords.
Does either a tenant's insurance policy or a landlord's insurance policy provide some buffer right now?
Yeah, I think going into this, that was the hope. I think what folks have found, and it's been difficult to find this out, is that from the business interruption side of things, from the clauses such as a force majeure clause in the lease, these leases really have not taken away that tenant's burden of paying rent. And the problem that most of these tenants are seeing is that they can't run their business normally. And so I think when you're engaging in those conversations with landlords want to do right by the tenants. I don't think it's a landlord against tenant or tenant against landlord type of environment. And so when we engage in those conversations, I think landlords are doing what they can to work with their tenants.
But what would you counsel your own customers if their landlord tells them, hey, I still need to pay real estate taxes, I need to pay my mortgage, I still need to maintain the property, and unless you pay rent, everyone's going to go out of business?
Yeah, and that's what they're saying, right? They're saying that the banks aren't, putting a halt on their payments from the ownership groups. And so I think what we're finding is some of these landlords are saying, listen, I will give a rent holiday. I will, cut rent in half for a period of time, maybe extend the lease, do something along those lines. I think the best thing, and the good landlords, which most of them are in these major markets, they want their tenants in business. If they don't want to come back from this work from home period of time and have doors boarded up or offices not occupied. And so I think that again, what I would tell them is, engage in a discussion. Be transparent with your landlord. This is not the time to hide information. It's the time to share information and have a working conversation with them. And we're a part of those discussions.
Does your advice differ if your clients are national tenants versus local?
I don't think so. I think that at the end of the day, transparency is transparency and honesty is honesty. And because the tenant may be national or local, but the landlord may not be. And so you may be dealing with a mom and pop landlord or an international REIT. And I think the one thing we've seen is a willingness, irrespective of who the landlord is, to conduct business the right way. Everyone is suffering. And I think that a sharing in that suffering has been something that we've seen. And by the way, that's for office tenants, for retail tenants, for any type of occupier.
So by sharing, does that mean that the tenant and the landlord should share some of that pain together? Or is it really just a timing issue that the landlord's always going to come out on top?
I don't think that, I think it's an interesting question. I don't think it's a who's on top and who's on the bottom. I think that a tenant's perspective is, they're paying for space. They're using the space to run their business. The problem right now is they're not using the space. So the idea of continuing to pay for it while it's not being used, it is a philosophical issue. And then it's also a financial issue. If we can absolve the financial issue temporarily, just put a halt on it and say, okay, over time, we can make that up. I think that's one way to solve the problem. I also think that it depends on where a tenant may be in their lease. If a tenant's lease is expiring in a year or in 2 years, and a landlord may see this as opportunistic. They might say, okay, if I can help bridge that gap for the tenant now, maybe they won't leave me in a year or two. And so I think that's something to keep in mind is it doesn't need to be landlord on top, tenant on top. It can be a win-win.
What do you tell a tenant who can physically go to their space, the landlord's still providing them access, but they're scared because they want to self-quarantine? Does that change your counsel at all?
I don't think so. I think that we are in an unprecedented time. And I think that, I have the burden, but also the privilege of running our company. And our company is structured to provide guidance to folks, and we can't go to the office. But it doesn't change the message that I give to our employees, which is wake up every day and grind and figure out how to service your clients at the highest level possible. And so I think that tenants are not going to go to their spaces right now. They're just not going to. Whether they've been deemed essential or non-essential businesses, there's a fear. There's an HR issue. There are liability issues that executives running these organizations need to take into account.
Any regional differences that you're seeing between cities?
I think it's a really good question. And that I think it's important to look backwards. And so if you think about our market compared to other major markets around the country, and you look in the most difficult times, so take the '08, the Great Recession. When we came out of that, Washington was outperforming other major markets. And I think that's in large part due to our client base, our tenant base, the nonprofit, the trade association world that stabilizes our market in comparison to, like a tech hub or something along those lines. So I think that our market historically has outperformed other major markets in down times. It's a much more stable market, and landlords know that. And so that's another reason why I think landlords are willing to say, I know this group is going to be around 3 years, 5 years, 7 years from now.
When do you think it's going to get better for everybody?
Man, now that is the question, the crystal ball. I think that the most important thing is obviously everyone's health and well-being. I think people want to get back to work. I think there was a sense of panic amongst the executives that I spoke to maybe 4 weeks ago. What is this going to be? How are we going to adapt? And all of a sudden, people have embraced it. I think that organizations have been unbelievably strong. Our team has been unbelievably strong in embracing the adversity and finding ways to push through. But I think now all of a sudden, and maybe it's just how many more of those lunches can I eat at my own dining room table, people want to get back to work. So, in DC, our mayor just extended. I think there are companies that I've talked to as recently as this morning that are thinking of how can we be back in the office in some way, shape, or form by the end of May. But I also think that there's a lot to be said for getting things done right now when we're not in the office. And I think that's been an amazing skill that people have had.
Looking through your website, you seem to have a lot of employees, and a lot of them are listed as managing directors. Do you consider those to be employees or independent contractors? And if so, does the PPP legislation help you to keep yourself afloat?
For our firm, we actually have gone through the PPP program. We have a mixture of both W-2 and 1099 folks. Many of the brokers are 1099, but we're also structured differently than some other commercial real estate advisory firms. In that way, we've gone through the PPP program. We have our SBA number. We are waiting for the funding, but not counting on it. I think that, and we could go on for hours about what we count on, but we've built a company very different than our competitors. And so I think what we rely on is each other more than any type of financial backing from the government. What I rely on, and I take a lot of pride in this, is my job every day throughout this has been to wake up and not only work with my clients, but also work with our brokers within our firm and make sure that they're operating at max productivity during this period of time.
What is the single biggest thing, Michael, that keeps you up at night about the future of MGA?
It's hard to go to bed when you're excited. I mean, that actually, and our company was born because of a dissatisfaction with the structure of most commercial real estate brokerage firms. And I do think that right now, What I'm most excited about is how we come out of this. So the excitement for where we are when we come out of this as a company, I believe we're the most well-positioned firm in the marketplace. I'm confident in that because of our team. So I'm proud to lead us.
Michael, thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Greg. Appreciate it.
Michael Goldman, the president of MGA Incorporated, 3 blocks from the White House.